The air inside the grand arena of High Moon was thick with the scent of ozone, damp stone, and ancient, metallic blood. Thousands of spectators roared from the tiered stone galleries, their voices blending into a deafening, rhythmic drone that vibrated right through the soles of Aris's leather boots. But she heard none of it. She stood in the center of the dusty, blood-streaked ground, her fingers coiled so tightly around the leather-wrapped hilt of her sword that her knuckles shone bone-white. The blade hummed, a low, rhythmic vibration that resonated with the magic pulsing in her veins. It was her only anchor in a world that had stripped everything else away. Opposite her stood a towering figure clad in interlocking plates of blackened steel. He didn't move. He didn't wave to the crowd. He simply watched her. The Dark Knight's presence was suffocating, drawing the light out of the arena and focusing it entirely onto his terrifying silhouette. Rumors had preceded him. A ruthless challenger who had swept through the kingdom's elite with a cold, terrifying efficiency. There was a haunting familiarity to the way he stood, balanced perfectly on his heels, his broad shoulders squared in a stance she had memorized years ago under the weeping willow trees of the old palace garden. Aris's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, trapped bird. It couldn't be him. He had been declared dead, or worse, exiled to the shifting wastes where no one survived. Yet, as the horn sounded to signal the start of the final bout, the Dark Knight drew his massive, glowing blue claymore. The weapon's edge crackled with a dangerous, icy frost that mirrored the sudden, freezing dread taking root deep in her chest. The knight moved with a blinding speed that defied the massive weight of his armor. Before the echo of the starting horn could even fade from the stone walls, he was across the arena, his claymore coming down in a devastating arc that threatened to cleave the very earth in two. Aris reacted on pure instinct. She spun to the left, the icy wind of his passing blade whistling past her ear and freezing the loose strands of her dark hair. She recovered instantly, stepping into his guard and driving her lighter sword toward the seam beneath his shoulder guard. But he parried her with an effortless flick of his wrist. The impact rattled up her arms, sending a jarring shockwave straight to her collarbone. They began to circle each other, a deadly, synchronized dance in the dirt. Every time her blade lashed out, he was there to meet it. Every clash of their swords sent bright blue sparks cascading around them like dying stars. "You're fighting with anger, little one," a voice rumbled from behind the heavy steel visor. The voice was deep, scraping against her raw nerves like velvet over broken glass. It was a voice she had heard in her sweetest dreams and her most terrifying nightmares. It was Harlan. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. He was alive. The man who had promised to protect her. The man who had shattered her heart into 1,000 jagged pieces before vanishing into the night, was standing right in front of her. He was holding a blade to her chest, his posture radiating a dangerous, mocking confidence that made her blood boil with sudden, uncontrollable fury. "How dare you?" Aris hissed, her voice lost to the roar of the crowd but carrying perfectly to the ears behind the steel mask. With a cry of pure defiance, she lunged. She abandoned her defensive stance, throwing herself into an aggressive flurry of strikes. Her sword became a blur of silver light, raining down on him from every angle. She forced him back, step by step, her anger fueling a sudden, desperate surge of magic that coated her blade in white-hot sparks. Harlan parried, but he was no longer doing so effortlessly. He was forced to use both hands on his hilt, his boots digging deep furrows into the dirt as he absorbed the sheer force of her rage. The crowd went wild, sensing the sudden shift in energy, but to Aris, the arena had shrunk to just the two of them. There was no court, no kingdom, no audience. There was only the weight of his betrayal. She remembered the night he left, the cold rain, the broken promises, and the lingering touch of his hand on her cheek before he disappeared. "Is this all you've learned since I've been gone?" Harlan taunted, though his breath was coming faster now. He ducked under a wild swipe, his armored shoulder slamming hard into her chest. The impact sent her sprawling onto the dusty ground. She rolled immediately, her heart thumping against her ribs, and scrambled back to her feet just as his heavy claymore came crashing down exactly where her head had been a fraction of a second before. The ground shattered, spraying sharp stone chips that cut her cheek, but she barely felt the sting. Before she could fully find her balance, Harlan was on her. He didn't swing his sword. Instead, he stepped inside her reach, using his massive frame to pin her against the damp stone wall of the arena boundary. The cold steel of his chest plate pressed hard against her front, trapping her arms between them. Her sword was wedged uselessly against his side, the hilt locked in his iron-clad grip. They were so close she could feel the intense heat radiating from his body despite the heavy armor. He leaned down, his visor mere inches from her face. Through the narrow slits of the blackened steel helm, she caught the unmistakable gleam of his dark, intense eyes. They weren't cold. They burned with a fierce, possessive hunger that made her entire body go completely still. "Let go of me," she whispered, her voice trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming wave of emotions crashing through her. The proximity was intoxicating, a painful reminder of the warmth she had craved for years. "Never again," Harlan murmured, his voice dropping to a rough, breathless register. "You always did have a habit of running straight into danger, Aris. Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" His grip on her wrists tightened, not to hurt her, but to hold her steady. For a second, the raw intensity of his gaze held her completely captive, the hatred she had nurtured for years suddenly warring with a desperate, suffocating longing. The spell was abruptly broken by a loud, booming voice echoing from the royal box high above the arena. "Yield, challenger, or face the wrath of the crown." It was Lord Kalen, the wealthy, arrogant noble who had spent the last 3 months trying to buy Aris's favor with lavish gifts and empty promises of safety. He was leaning over the gilded railing, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial rapier, his eyes fixed on the intimate position of the two fighters below. Aris felt Harlan's entire posture stiffen. The possessive warmth in his eyes instantly hardened into a freezing, lethal glare directed straight toward the royal box. A low, menacing growl vibrated in his chest, a sound so primal it sent a shiver down Aris's spine. "Who is he to you?" Harlan demanded, his grip on her wrists tightening to a borderline painful level as jealousy flared visibly behind his visor. "Why does he look at you as if he owns you?" "That is none of your business." Harlan, Aris spat, trying to blink away the sudden moisture in her eyes. "You lost the right to ask about my life the moment you walked away." "I walked away to keep you alive," he hissed, his face pressing closer, his breath hot against her skin. "And I will tear this entire arena down before I let another man touch what belongs to me." Before Aris could process his words, Harlan abruptly released his grip and stepped back, his claymore swirling in a defensive arc as the arena guards began to pour onto the field, their weapons drawn. The crowd was in utter chaos, shouting and screaming as the tournament devolved into a potential riot. Harlan kept his back to her, shielding her body from the advancing guards with his own massive frame. He looked over his shoulder, the visor of his helmet tilted just enough for her to see the hard line of his jaw and the fierce promise in his eyes. "This isn't over, little flame," he said, his voice cutting through the noise of the clashing armor and shouting guards. "I didn't come back to fight you. I came back to take you home." With a sudden, explosive burst of magic, Harlan slammed his claymore into the stone ground. A massive shockwave of blue frost rippled outward, blinding the guards and creating a thick, freezing mist that instantly enveloped the entire arena floor. When the mist cleared seconds later, the dark night was gone, leaving only a trail of frost and a lingering, suffocating tension that left Aris standing alone in the center of the ruins, her heart beating wildly with a dangerous mix of terror, anger, and a sudden, undeniable hope.